Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, June 27th, 2025, and today we're going to talk how to tell if your soil is healthy, garlic rust and what to do about that, and it's Feedback Friday, so let's do it. All right, lovely Friday to you all. I hope everyone is doing well. It is it's still hot here. There's really not a whole lot to add to that. And I will talk a little bit more about what I've been up to in the heat next week. But anyway, for now, it's Friday, which means Feedback Friday, where we explore what you all were saying about this week's topics. On Monday, we talked about ticks, the king pepper, and when no-till is actually harder. And oh boy, was that a rough one in the comment section in terms of hearing all the ways in which ticks have upended people's lives, and specifically the diseases that ticks carry. One tick's comment/question that came up actually led me down an interesting rabbit hole that may necessitate its own talk later. It was from Stefan R570, who wrote, quote, "Are chickens, guinea fowl, and other birds effective at removing ticks from your property? I thought they were, but I don't have them myself, and I guess market gardeners don't either," end quote. So I've always heard guinea fowl were good for tick removal, and in fact, we released some guineas at our old property where ticks were plentiful, and the tick populations did seem to die. However, anecdotes are anecdotes, not science, and I found one study that found, quote, "no evidence that guinea fowl are an effective biological control of Lone Star ticks or tick-borne pathogens, but they are hosts of Lone Star nymphs. Future studies are needed to assess the complex ecology of a biological control of ticks that is also a host," end quote. There are a couple studies that showed guineas reduced abundance of certain ticks in certain areas, but there was no measurement of if at that same time, they were also hosts of ticks or other ticks. Similar research exists for chickens, so it's complicated because it may just cancel itself out, but I can follow up more on that in the future if you're interested, because I know I am. That is fascinating. Also, on Monday, this comment from @Miroir du Songe, I'm assuming that's in French, unless it's just like Meyer or I du Songe, actually covered two of the subjects we discussed. They wrote, quote, "In Germany, we call it Königsblüte, king's flower, and I was told by my gardening/farming teacher to always snap them off. Leaving them," he said, "slows down the overall plant growth. Removing them encourages the plant to produce more flowers faster." And yes, tick populations have exploded here as well. Just got 4 the other day simply by walking through mowed grass in my lawns garden. It's wild. Thanks for all you do. You're such an inspiration. Much love. So indeed, king's pepper or king's blossom. So fascinating. I don't know what the etymology is there, but I feel like it's poking fun at the monarchy, and I kind of love it. It's funny. On Tuesday, we talked about farmware and keeping the garden cool, and I thought this from @AnnikaCDVM was interesting. Quote, "I pity the fool who's not wearing linen on the sweltering days. I buy linen fabric, 60% off in February, and sew summer clothes for the fam. I can bang out a shirt in a day now, and it costs me as little as $13 per shirt. They fit, no microplastics, rinse and rewear, and it's cooler than anything except hemp, but hemp cloth is usually slubby and less fun to sew with. No blends. Blends ruin the breathability and the wicking and the self-bleaching characteristics of the linen," end quote. Two things come to mind here. One, linen does rule. It really does. It's so nice and cool to wear in the summertime. It's a little more expensive, but obviously this is where Annika has been figuratively, but could also be literally if they wanted it to be, skirting that issue by sewing the shirts themselves. And my second thought is that I wish I knew how to sew. I mean, I can still learn, but that's the type of skill we should all graduate with. It should be a requirement to have to sew your own cap and gown, for instance. Why not? Maybe more on that later. Moving on, this Wednesday we had the amazing Cat Fields White on to talk about the state and business of farmers markets, and lots of great comments about that and about how insightful Cat was. @Randall Lockin, wrote, quote, "Wow, didn't realize how much goes into this. This is good stuff," end quote. And yeah, farmers market managers have incredibly complex and often stressful jobs, so make sure to show them some love next time you see your local farmers market manager. Very much an underappreciated warrior of the local food economy. Then on Thursday, we discussed starting a garden later in life, and I heard from a few people like @RandallCummings6337 who said, quote, "Started a market garden at 63. I'm now 68 and still doing it," end quote, which is awesome. Good on you, Ron. Also heard from at Morningstar STR, who wrote, quote, my mom started a market garden at 65 when she retired. The market part of the garden never made a profit, but we did grow enough fresh produce to eat all summer and storage crops enough to last through the winter. Growing food to sell to other people is tough, end quote. Thanks. And yeah, market gardens are a lot of work, especially in the beginning. If you don't need the money and just want to grow a big garden, there are always also like nonprofits and food banks around you can collaborate with to make sure some of that food gets to someone who could use it. But if you need the money, it's possible to do a sort of market garden setup for sure. But there are also easier, perhaps less capital intensive businesses to get into than market gardening that are also perhaps agricultural or community minded and those sorts of things. Anyway, we also talked about birds that day, and I liked this from at Marco Zolo, 1749, who wrote, quote, I have to cover my strawberry patch with deer netting on a frame to keep the birds, I think cardinals, from taking little nibbles on ripening berries. Same with my raspberries. I just share my snap peas with them since they don't seem to start pecking at them until later in the season. I have 4 nest boxes in my backyard garden / meadow. It is great to have wildlife around in the garden, end quote. Thanks. And yeah, I didn't even get into bird nettings or for berries or any of that sort of stuff. But for some folks, that may at least from time to time become a necessity. Nettings are a somewhat controversial technique because they can keep birds out for sure, but also trap birds inside when not done well, and not to mention the amount of plastic it is to cover a large area and the expense, etc. So anyway, maybe a topic for another time. Great stuff. As always, you all, you are the best. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. And when we return, garlic rust. Doesn't sound like very exciting, but it's a good topic. Anyway, BRB. And just right on cue, I have a tick just crawling around on my BCS. Hey buddy, what you doing? This isn't your normal habitat. It's a tractor. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. If you're listening to this, you probably found 5 rare minutes to breathe. But what got pushed back further down the to-do list to make that happen? If it's your CSA newsletter, you're not alone. Farmhand's new newsletter builder was made for busy farmers. It automates weekly emails, drives add-on sales, and makes it easy to keep your customers in the loop without spending hours behind a screen. It launches this summer, but our listeners can request early access now. Visit farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Pollinate Farm, who writes, quote, hey, Farmer Jesse, please impart some wisdom and or guidance on garlic rust. I planted 6 varieties, hard and soft neck, in mid-October. I mulched heavily with straw and it overwintered very well. Zone 9B 10/10A, Oakland, California, during the so-called rainy season. This spring, some beds started to show signs of rust, but it was no big deal. Some varieties were definitely more affected than others. Fast forward to mid-May, and the entire 7 beds are completely covered in rust. So much so that there are no more green leaves. I harvested a couple of plants, and the bulbs don't look like they've been affected at all. I usually harvest mid to late June. Should I cut my losses and go ahead and start lifting the bulbs? The beds were not the same beds I used for my garlic crop last year, talking crop rotation, and I definitely won't be growing garlic in these beds next year. Can you speak to treatment of garlic rust, causes, preventions, and more importantly, what crop do you recommend I should follow in these beds after the garlic has been lifted? I grow leafies primarily, mostly heirloom collards, lettuce, and kales. Tarping and resting the beds is not an option as these beds make up a significant portion of my farm and I need the production space this season. As always, you rock. Come through the Bay Area sometime. Our small but mighty community of rain-obsessed nerds would love to host you. Thanks, Yolanda at Pollinate Farm. End quote. All right. Awesome. Great questions here, Yolanda. And bummer about the garlic crop. That's a super big bummer. Garlic rust is, in fact, not a disease I have covered yet, so that's fun, but I know it is one that affects you all out west quite a lot, so let's dive into it a bit. First, rust is a fungal disease that affects garlic, obviously, but also somewhat to a lesser extent, other alliums such as onions and chives and wild alliums and leeks, though typically these are infected only when growing near garlic that has rust. There is also a separate leek type of rust that is less common in the U.S. Anyway, in other words, these other alliums are not generally the vector of the disease so much, but more of the casualties of proximity. Rust starts out as small white flecks on the leaves and slowly evolves over the season into the classic rusty-looking pustules that it imparts on the leaves, leading to dead or yellow leaves or even black leaves, poor photosynthesis, and a dramatic loss in yield, and in severe cases, a dramatic loss in marketability. It spreads by spores generated on the foliage of the garlic plant, and once you have it, there is no known effective organic remedy, at least none that won't also limit the yield. So let's talk about what can be done and what to do when you see it. Research on garlic rust, I should say, is annoyingly scant. It's weirdly scant. There is some for sure. Any economically important crop like that gets some decent research, but I was surprised at how much digging I had to do to get any insight here. But I'll share what I learned, and then others can chime in on with their observations or techniques for managing garlic rust and those sorts of things. First, the seed. Garlic is planted generally from garlic cloves, which we call the seed. Although one small study did find under controlled conditions that replanting infected but untreated garlic cloves did not result in rust the next season, that is not something I'm personally going to recommend based on the research I can find. Part of the reason for that is the controlled conditions part of their research. In fact, many growers say that they have more success, i.e. less rust, growing inside of high tunnels in what we call protected culture. Those conditions seem to be more preventative of garlic rust. Perhaps it's less stress on the plant, or it has something to do with the protection of the plastic or the UVs. I don't know. Whatever it is, it does seem to help. Assuming you do not have a tunnel, then I would be careful about replanting that garlic that has been infected the previous year into next year. Not saying it won't be fine, just be cautious and also do some of the other things that might help prevent it. I would also grow a few different garlic varieties, like you kind of sounds like you do, to find the one most resistant to rust in your climate/region. There are no entirely rust-resistant varieties that I'm aware of on the market in the U.S., but there may be some that are more tolerant than others in a given context, meaning they won't necessarily allow it to get out of control. Now, in terms of soil preparation, over-fertilizing with nitrogen has been shown to lead to greater outbreaks of rust, so avoid perhaps straight nitrogen fertilizers or anything that's heavy in nitrogen, like perhaps, I don't know, blood meal or something. I haven't seen any specific study on that, but that's what I think of when I think of applying too much nitrogen. A nicely balanced compost should be enough, but avoid perhaps like a straight fertilizing compost or material like chicken manure or, like I said, blood meal. Making sure the soil is also draining well and staying adequately moist, which just sounds like an odd thing to say, but accurate. You need moisture, but you also need the soil to be able to breathe and release excess water as well. Full sun may also help a bit to prevent rust to it, so ensure the garlic does not suffer from long periods in the shade. Spacing can also have an effect on garlic rust occurrence and spread. Spacing bulbs slightly further apart next year than you did this year may lend itself to better rust resistance. Some research suggests 4 to 5 inches apart, like 10 by 13 centimeters, to prevent garlic rust in a dry climate, but that still seems pretty close to me. We plant ours at like 7.5 inches by 7.5 inches on a grid, but we also are in a very wet climate where if we planted it much denser, we will run into our own annoying fungal diseases that aren't necessarily rust, but are also not great. Also, you will not want to plant anywhere near where you planted this year for the next 3 years. What you plant next in that area is really just anything but an allium and isn't as consequential as the cleanup. Like growing any of your greens there, it sounds like will be perfect for that, Yolanda. You will want to diligently clean up any weeds from around that area to prevent host plants from harboring this particular fungus, and especially any other wild alliums. Any debris from the garlic crop should be fully composted or removed. Now, garlic rust spores can travel pretty good distances in the wind, so it may not matter how much you do if a neighbor has rust. So those other elements of managing the soil and spacing are going to be important in prevention. Some growers recommend planting it earlier as well, though I can't tell if there's any effective research behind that. As it grows, if you see small white spots, you could potentially clip those parts of the leaves off and remove them to prevent spread. But depending on the plot, that may be a big job. And you don't want to remove too much of the leaf because, well, that's where the bulb gets its energy. Now, once you have it, you kind of have it. So some growers will spray copper fungicide, but I'm not going to recommend that because although some copper is allowed in organic production, it's a broad spectrum fungicide, so it will kill your good guy fungi as well. I know I'm a bit late on this one, but as for pulling it early, I don't necessarily see a huge advantage to doing that, save for the preventing some of the spores from spreading. The garlic will not yield as well as healthy garlic, but it will still yield something. So it's worth just allowing it to grow out as much as you can and then trying again next year. Anyway, let us know, growers, what you all have found to be successful with the garlic rust. And one of these days, I'm sure I will eventually make it to the Bay Area. Weirdly, a place I've never been. So good to know I have some fellow nerds out there to hang out with. Otherwise, I hope that was helpful, Yolanda. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, how to spot healthy soil. Be right back.
Today's episode is brought to you by FarmRaise. Still struggling with your balance sheet? Your lender's asking for a balance sheet and you're stuck with a spreadsheet mess or guessing your numbers? FarmRaise Tracks takes the stress out of farm finance. With one click, you can generate an accurate, up-to-date balance sheet that shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. No accounting degree required. You'll be ready for loan applications, tax season, or just a clearer picture of where your farm stands. Join thousands of farmers using Tracks to build stronger businesses. Get 20% off with code NOTIL20 at farmraise.com for the lifetime of your membership. All right, back to the show.
So a question that comes up from time to time is, how do I know if my soil is healthy? Like, is there any way a grower can measure it without literally measuring it? We are going to start diving into soil tests soon, and since I promised that way back in the winter, but I love this question of how to do it ourselves because, like most things I talk about, the answer is quite nuanced and contextual, but there are some relatively universal things to look for when trying to determine if all the good things that you're doing for your soil are actually doing any good. Let's start with some stuff you can see. First is color. Now, some soil particles from the parent material, like the rocks that have been broken down over millions of years of erosion that create soil, are just darker than others. And I have seen farmers in areas with really dark parent material who farm completely conventionally, plowing up the dark soil, tilling it, using chemicals, all that stuff, that is more or less, and it's leaving it more or less depleted in nutrients from years of mismanagement, but the soil is still dark. In other words, just because their soil was black did not mean it was healthy. In fact, one of the best plots I have in terms of production on this farm is not super dark in color, but the production and soil aggregation is exceptional. And I'll talk about aggregation presently. Of course, as a grower, if over the years you can see your soil getting darker and darker, especially deeper and deeper down, either by comparing it to pictures or maybe an uncultivated area nearby, that is a better measurement than just how dark the soil happens to be. If it's slowly getting darker and darker, that's a sign that you are adding soil organic matter to the soil and thus improving it. Color can notably also show when the soil is not in good health. Shiny grays and greens in the soil itself are generally a sign of low oxygen environments. So that could be a sign that perhaps something you're doing or the previous landowners were doing has compacted the soil or stolen its soil organic matter or whatever, and or the drainage is not adequate. Signs of poor soil health. Now, while we're using our eyes to stick with that sense, taking a slice of the soil and examining it for holes and worms and critters like earthworms at various levels, but also arthropods and all the things, is one way to tell that, at very least, your soil is hospitable to life. Also, more important than that, perhaps, is soil aggregation, microscopic little bundles of soil particles wrapped around organic matter that gives soil its special ability to retain or even release water as needed while also being an excellent source of food storage for microbes. To measure soil aggregation at home, you can do what's called a slake test. This is when you basically take a chunk of soil and you set it in a sieve, and you set that sieve into some water in a clear container. The water should not turn brown, and you can even compare it to compacted or depleted soil so you have a good idea of how different your soil is from poor soils. I will post a link for how to do that in the show notes, along with the whole other video I did on the subject of soil health measuring a couple years ago. There are other things I could add here too, like smell. Generally speaking, your body responds positively to healthy smelling soils. So healthy soils should smell rich and sweet to you. It should smell good. Also, obviously, production is a good sign of soil health. Nothing quite says my soil is not very healthy, like poor performance. Anyway, there's a lot of other stuff I could add, from microscopy to rhizosheaths that collect on the bottom of the roots, that you can see here if you're watching on YouTube. But I think I'm going to call it a Friday. I think we're done here. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. She'd love to hear from you. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No Till Growers. Also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of June for the next few days, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to, are we going to get to finish our story? Coming in clutch, Jason Holstein. All right, so as you will remember, our little girl has started a long night of hide and seek, and she chose the potato pile, hidden to look like a little trash pile inside of their tunnel, which has its own sort of built-in little, like, elaborate little tunnel system that she made. So she kind of lays down in a corner, and there are like loud bangs all night, and her mom had told her that I am going to find you. You do not move until I come to get you. And, that was the stipulation of this particular hide and seek. Eventually, after several hours, and the booms stop, she kind of falls asleep, and the ground stops shaking and all those things. But her mother doesn't come to find her. Maybe the little girl thinks she just hid too well. And this time, her mom couldn't find her. And so she decides to come out of her hiding spot. But her mother is not in the tunnel. So she goes out to see if she's in the garden. The air outside is like thick with smoke, and it's quiet, and she kind of walks out to see the garden, and the garden, she can tell, is just completely smashed. It looks like it's been driven over and just stomped on. Then she suddenly feels a warm hand on her shoulder and looks up to see her mother, tired and dirty with a large wound on her leg. And her mother smiles with that smile that says, "I'm okay." Then the little girl asks, "What happened to our garden?" And her mom, brushes away a tear and then gets that playful, stern look on her face and just looks at her daughter, shaking her head, and says, "Those darn ogres." All right. Thanks for watching and/or listening. We will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend. Bye.